Like you're basically not very useful for the first 20 years of your life because you're still figuring shit out, and you're not very useful for the last 20 years of your life because you're getting up 3 times a night to go for a pee. And if you pick up Forbes magazine and you look at the richest people in the world, they all took their companies public and used it as a platform to grow, not as an exit. So the top 500 asset managers in the world control $100 trillion of investment. In Russia last year, they arrested 400 people for saying things on social media. In the UK, it was 3,000 people like in a month.
So when I've done really well in my sales role in the last 3 years, some of my income is taxed at 60%. How is that sustainable?
60% plus the NI plus the employer's NI. So you're 90. Right. It's 90%.
Before we dive into this episode, I want to ask you to hit the subscribe button here on YouTube. It helps keep growing the channel and keep getting fantastic guests like this one. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And we were in full flow before we hit start about the challenges around the UK.
I've got nothing left to say now.
That'll be the challenge. But when people look up Jeremy Harbour, it's synonymous with acquisition entrepreneurship. For people who have never heard that term before, what on earth does it mean?
Yeah, so I think it's really just this idea that instead of building a business from scratch, you can buy one that's already operational. And actually, 90% of business startups fail. So why not buy one that got through that first, the pushing shit uphill phase, so that it's a bit more downhill after that. And I think the way I describe it quite often is you don't need to run the marathon, you can just run the last 10 yards and you still get a medal. So I think even if you have like a tech idea or some change the world type solution, you could buy a business and pivot that business into doing whatever it is you came up with in the shower that morning, instead of doing a startup which costs loads of money and takes up loads of time.
That's it. And it's finding those not hidden gems, but like gems that are in your awareness and you can add value to. Yeah,
basically, if you go out into the street blindfolded, you trip over them everywhere. 50% of economic output comes from small to medium-sized businesses. It's 90% of the private sector workforce. So if you go to a dinner party with 10 people, 9 of them work for a small business, 1 works for a multinational, although
if you're in the UK, it'll be public sector.
Statistically, well, yeah, ignoring the public sector, the private sector workforce, don't get me started. The UK is now basically a communist country, isn't it, with the amount of people it employs?
By the state,
it's a great way of getting voted in next time, isn't it? It's just keep increasing their salaries and increasing their pensions. But anyway, so these businesses are everywhere. They're in every town, city, village, everywhere, and they don't have a natural succession plan. 40% of them are owned by baby boomers. Baby boomers are now in their 70s, so they're it's a ticking clock to them retiring or no longer being around. And the next generation doesn't particularly want these businesses either, because the younger generation wants something in AI or crypto or something that's like a bit sexy sounding. They don't want an elevator engineering company or a mechanical electrical engineering company or a joinery company or something like that. And so there's a load of these businesses that just don't have a natural succession. And actually what we're seeing is only about 8% of the businesses that get put up for sale through a business broker actually sell, because there's not much of a natural market at that level. And most of the businesses aren't really prepared to sell, so they're not good purchase candidates. And so we're seeing more and more people just shut their business down. They will typically wind it down over a 2 to 3 year period, where as staff members leave, they don't replace them. They just harvest as much cash as they can from the business and then lock the doors. And the craziest one I saw recently was a $10 million a year revenue solar company. It was actually selling solar panels that would be installed on people's houses, and also portable solar generators, which they did a lot of for like caravan and camping type usages. They were importing them from China and selling them, and quite good margins, 10 million a year in revenue, had been going for about 8 or 9 years, couldn't find a buyer, and literally locked the doors and went away. They were retiring overseas. They tried to sell it before their move date, couldn't sell it before the move date, just locked the door and walked away. They even let, about 3 months before they left, they let their URL expire, and most of their sales came from online. So they literally just didn't renew.
Turned the tap off.
Just didn't renew the URL, and it just fell over. Now, how many people listening to this would like to pick up a 10-year-old company that sold solar generators doing 10 million a year, that you could then build upon, and they would have given you the keys for nothing. You could maybe say, look, if it's successful, I'll give you something later. And there are tons and tons of businesses like this that perhaps believe they can get some big 6 or 7 figure sum for their business, but when they actually try, they can't. There's not that natural market for them. So it really is a buyer's market out there.
Yeah, I find it really interesting, and it's opened my mind entirely just doing the research for this episode. I was just blown away by some of the strategies, and we definitely will get onto them in depth. But I guess from your own business background, you've said before in your bio that business was in your blood, but a number of experiences really lit and put fire on that. What were those?
God, there's loads of things that kind of shaped me growing up. I mean, I guess one of them was the way, I guess, my parents brought me up around money. So I could work for £1 an hour on my dad's farm, or I could figure out another way of making that money. And that kind of got me into kind of selling stuff at school and coming up with business ideas. Also, on a farm, you have this seasonal business. And so there was always the off-season side gigs that my dad had. And that was quite inspirational in terms of...
I wrote down a couple of them. It was like pet food, fish baiting, paving slabs. Like you really ingenuitive away from the kind of core family farm business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it was, these and I was always involved in these side hustles. And so that was kind of a good education. And I think, interestingly, the school I went to, the people there basically either worked for the government in some capacity, or their parents worked for the government in some capacity, or they worked in, corporates. There wasn't anybody else that had like an entrepreneur family. And so I think they all had, they were all deciding, am I going to be a doctor or a lawyer? Am I going to be join the army? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? And for me, it was like, I can do whatever I want. Literally, there was this third way, which is just do whatever the fuck you want. And I think that was very empowering as well.
Are you grateful for that upbringing?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. 1000%. I mean, that's the genetic lottery, isn't it? That you just, where you wake up.
I say it so often on the pod, Jeremy. I think parents are conservative with a small c. Mm-hmm. Particularly in the UK, where over the last 30, 40 years, there has been a big push towards do your A-levels, or in Scotland, your hires, go to university, get the graduate job, get the mortgage, get the house, get the kids. And that's like the safe path, because that's what the schooling system is kind of pushing towards. So to have parents that are maybe willing to say, do whatever you want to do, is actually on the rare side.
Yeah, and particularly as actually they were both the first people in the family's history to go to university. So they were really like this product of the sprawling middle class that boomed in the kind of 50s, 60s, 70s. And so there was actually a bit of pressure on me to do it because they were the first to go to university, and that was like a really big deal for them. And I mean, we did one of those, like, those hereditary things where they look into your family history and you kind of wonder if you're related to King Canute or something like this, and no, I'm related to literally a million labourers and dockyard workers. There is literally no one of note in my entire ancestry, so... Yeah,
that's remarkable. But it's great. You've had that background where you're at school and you're able to be like the hustler in the playground, which is great. I know you've spoken before about the loss of your brother at a young age. Do you believe that had an impact when it comes to entrepreneurship?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so I was 10, he was 14, and obviously, when you're brothers, you fight all the time. So all your lasting memories are of being horrible to each other, and so that's a pretty, that creates all horrible amounts of kind of regret and remorse. But also just the fear of sudden death, I mean, literally it's an anxiety that I suffered with for years and years and years in terms of, am I next? Is it, am I going to wake up tomorrow? Is this it, But then again, that also gives you a sense of urgency around the things that you want to get on and do. And so spending 2 years doing A-levels when A-levels are really only a gateway to get into university, and then to have to spend another 3 years in university, it was like, fuck, that's 5 years of not doing stuff. I need to be doing stuff in that 5 years, so.
It's interesting. I've heard you carry forward a lesson in terms of, you speak about people doing things in 3-year cycles in terms of like startups. And I wonder how much of that is reflected in you understanding that 3 years is actually quite a lot of time and you only have a number of those across a period of life.
So I've often, when I've been giving presentations, and this always, people hate this concept, but I normally say, like, you're basically not very useful for the first 20 years of your life because you're still figuring shit out, and you're not very useful for the last 20 years of your life because you're getting up 3 times a night to go for a pee. And so there's a bit in the middle, which if you're really lucky, if you're one of the longer living variety, is going to be about 40 years. So when you dedicate 10 or 20 years to a particular career or a particular business, that's 25 or 50% of your useful life that's been devoted to that one project. And so, the juice better be worth the squeeze, because there's only so many of those chunks that are, built into that useful bit in the middle. And of course, that pisses everybody off. Everyone under 20 and over 60 anyway. So.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been speaking about recently is, and it's sort of a James Clear, Alex Hormozy idea from the two of them, where 65-year-old you would pay anything to be the age you are now. So I turned 32 this year, and a lot of my friends are like in their mid-20s, and they're thinking, 32 is really old. And I'm thinking, well, in 10 years' time, I would kill to be this age again. And in the same way, that expands all the way out to somebody in their 80s who's looking back at their career as well. And I think it's a case of like, if you have reminders like losing a loved one at a young age, or just having these sort of conversations or consuming content like this, then it's that little joke sometimes to be like, you should probably do something now, not wait.
But I mean, the death thing was interesting because we had like a guy at school that died, a guy that I was best man at his wedding who died, my brother who died, and also my grandmother was one of 14 children. And so I had all these uncles that when I was a kid I got to know, and they disappeared because she was the youngest one. So like literally, I must have gone to like 30 funerals by the time I was 15.
My goodness.
And then I'd meet like 35-year-olds and 40-year-olds that had never been to a funeral. And for me, it was just like, really? Is that possible? Like, you don't know anyone or what? So it was just really, I didn't realize how unusual that was at the time. I just thought it was part of growing up, you know, the people around you start disappearing at a certain point. And yeah, it's only later on I found that was quite exceptional. So
definitely exceptional. Yeah. But I guess we're all products of our experiences and upbringings, and these things stick with us. And if it's meant that you've gone on to be more focused on the time that you do have, then it gives with one hand but takes with the other.
Every cloud and all that.
Yeah, exactly that. So what did you go to first? Because I know you left school at 15.
Yeah. So I was supplying watches and jewellery. I had a little I was selling them at school, and then I had a little market stall at the weekends where I'd be selling them there as well. And then I figured out that if I bought more, say, digital watches, I could get them much cheaper. And so I started selling them to other market traders so that I got my stock for a lower price, kind of breaking the bulk down into smaller amounts. And then that turned into like a bit of a wholesaling business of buying stuff and selling it to other market traders. And I actually had there was like a magazine for market traders, and I was advertising in there every week and selling off the stock so that mine would be cheaper, so that when I went to the market I had higher margins. And so yeah, I was kind of in the wholesale business at the age of 15.
Such good lessons at a young age.
Yeah, it was, there's a market trading expression, bought right is half sold, which is this idea is that you make your money on the way into a transaction more than you do on the way out. It gives you a lot more power. And I think in buying businesses, that's also extremely relevant, you know. It's kind of like trying to create an asymmetric bet. So it's like heads I win, tails I don't lose. And if you can create those asymmetric bets, you can go full bore, you know, you can do as many as you can. If somebody offers you an asymmetric bet, you take it, don't you?
Over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I know that business wound up after a few years. What went wrong there?
Yeah, a catalogue of lessons. I mean, the first one was we went off in a completely different direction. So one of the people that we were buying stock from when I went there had an amusement machine in their office, and I bought it off them and then supplied it to our local pub. Thought that was really cool, so started supplying them to loads of other pubs and clubs and stuff like that. Then basically went from being a wholesale business into an amusement machine company. And then it culminated with me buying an amusement arcade. Now, prior to that, I had them on other people's premises. So I was using their heat, their light, their electricity, their staff, and I just provided the machine and shared the earnings from it with them. When I had my amusement arcade, suddenly it was my rent, my heat, my lights, my staff. I'd never employed people before. You know, I always say now to people, you know, the hardest thing about business is staff and customers. And so when you buy and sell companies, you're buying and selling the shares in a company. You don't have much involvement in the staff or the customers. So it's kind of like entrepreneurship without all the annoying bits.
You remove a couple of the headaches.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the two biggest ones.
The two biggest ones, yeah. So suddenly I just had this baptism of fire learning about all this stuff, and yeah, I fell over miserably. And the funny thing was I'd kind of done a fuck you, I'm leaving home thing to the parents, you know, and moved out and moved into my own place at the age of 17. And then like at the age of 19 I had to come back and go, you still got that spare room? so there's a great
tail between the legs.
Great bit of humility there, you know. It was, good lesson.
Again, it was quite funny. We were talking last night about almost the competitive advantage if you have supportive parents to live at home for as long as possible, to allocate capital either to a deposit for a property or for you to relocate to another, if you want to leave the UK, for example, or to put money towards a business that you can grow and scale as well. Whereas some people are desperate to move out and escape the nest.
Get out, yeah. I think I wanted to get out because I lived in the middle of nowhere. It's a farming community, and I mean, actually, I always joke when people say, where did you grow up? I said, oh, you drive to the middle of nowhere, turn left, and it's another 2 hours. It's like literally. Yeah.
And at 19, with a business that you're growing, you kind of want to be out and about and see it's doing well.
Yeah.
That makes total sense. What did you turn your hand to next after that?
Yeah, so after kind of brushing myself off and dusting myself down, I saw that mobile phones were starting to take off in the UK. They were still kind of brick-sized at the time. But one of the big challenges that people had was that they would sign up for one, and a week later a better one would come out. And if they signed up for that one, they couldn't move their number from one phone to another. So this is how long ago I'm talking. And so there was this thing called personal numbering, which was a number that followed you around everywhere. And so I got a license from the largest provider of personal numbers in the UK to go out and sell them. And so I started going around trying to sell these personal numbers. And what you're trying to do is educate somebody to buy something they've never bought before. It's that getting them to spend a pound they've never spent. So the whole sales process is an education process. And it was relatively successful, and we sold a few hundred of these numbers in a short space of time. But everybody that I would go and see would say, can you get me a mobile phone? Can you get this model, or can you get this one that's just come out? And so I decided, well, rather than trying to sell the thing that I have to explain for 20 minutes, why don't I sell the thing that everybody's asking for? And so I started selling mobile phones, and the great thing with mobile phones at the time was nobody had one, so it was all blue ocean. It was completely green field. And if you went to like a networking meeting or something, every single person in that room either had one and wanted to change it, or needed to get their first one. And so it was just, the perfect thing to go out selling.
That business pivot made a lot more sense than going from your watches to amusement machines.
Yes, it was slightly more related. Yeah.
Was this the business that you got related with AIG? Or you were supplying, to them?
I
saw the headline telecoms, and I wondered if that was the business.
Yeah, no, it wasn't actually. It was a call center that I bought, had the AIG contract. But yeah, so basically, I grew the telecoms company organically. That market then kind of plateaued. Everybody that wanted a phone had one. And so now all the money was in trying to get people to switch contracts. And that was much harder because you're waiting for things to expire, and it's kind of like selling insurance, I guess.
There's trigger dates. Renewal date, for example.
Exactly, yeah. So, and that makes it a big pain in the arse. And then what I noticed is that all the other successful telcos were acquiring other telecoms companies. So if you wanted to add 1,000 customers, instead of waiting for 1,000 customers' contracts to expire, you go buy the company down the road that has 1,000 customers, and overnight you add those to your database. And so lots of people were trying to buy me, and all the reasons I hadn't thought about doing this were bank wouldn't give me money. I didn't have any money. I had a choice of paying my credit card or my staff. It wasn't like I had all this extra cash I could throw at an acquisition. And so, just thought that, acquisition wasn't something I could do. And then I realized all the people sitting across the table from me, pitching me these things, they didn't have any fucking money either. So when I'd listened to a few of them, I thought I need to be on that side of the table because I can say that shit and do this. And so literally went around. Now, at this time, I'm in my early 20s. I look super young. I describe myself as a late shaver. So even in my early 20s, I looked fucking 15, And I used to overcompensate with the fancy dress department and wear a nice suit and all this sort of stuff. But still, credibility was always a bit.
You want to be taken seriously, and
Yeah.
I've always looked young. And when I first worked in insurance, I was wearing the blue suit and the brown shoes, but I looked like maybe I was going to the school prom
Your
rather
first
than
job
a
interview
meeting.
or something.
Exactly. So it can be a bit of a challenge in that perspective.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I managed to talk my way into a deal, and we added a year's worth of sales overnight without any upfront cost. We paid it all on a deferred basis, and it was just an epiphany that it was this: you don't have to run the marathon, you can just run the last 10 yards. Epiphany, that was the first transaction. A week later, I did my second one, and the third one was the call center business, which was a 1.2 million a year call center business that had AIG as a client, which was a blessing and later a curse.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that. But these were the sort of light bulb moments, or what commonly comes up with guests is like a proof of concept moment, where I'm going to do this thing, and if I get a positive feedback loop, I'm going to do it again and again and again, while of course refining the approach to it, because I'm sure there were little fine print errors that you made in those early days, or ways that things you could have done things better. But when you prove to yourself that this approach works, and it fiscally has a return, and you enjoy the process, then you can see why it's turned into a career for you rather than a one-hit wonder.
Yeah, and I think you make a really important point there, because it's that replication and leaning into something that's working that I think defines success for a lot of people. Because what I see is a lot of people who lean into something, it doesn't work, and they keep leaning and leaning and leaning it, and they basically, the expression I use is, when the horse is dead, it's time to get off. People waste an awful lot of time going down the wrong rabbit hole in terms of like pushing against something. If there's not a little bit of path of least resistance feeling, then it might not be worth doing. That whole try and try again. It might be time to try something slightly different, or a different approach to the same thing, because sometimes it means it's not going to work, and so you shouldn't keep persisting down that particular channel. It's quite a common kind of mistake.
Sunk cost fallacy. People believe, I've invested so much time and energy in this, I must just keep going. Yeah. And there's definitely phrases that I like the only way is through. Because when something's hard, sometimes you should just bite down the gum shield and go through. Yeah. And I think many of the people in today's society, particularly modern men of my generation, aren't very resilient and will quit. Yeah. But the kind of people that we're maybe in an echo chamber with are so guilty of just thinking that keep going.
There's kind of two wrong directions, I guess. One is the shiny new thing syndrome, which is they're just becoming an expert in blockchain and now they're going into AI, or they're just, they just keep flipping to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, instead of doubling down on where they already have the experience and the knowledge. They probably get themselves to that top 5% in the country that they live in, and then they go down a different avenue and they don't monetize being in that top 5%. And the other one is spending too much time on something that just isn't getting the traction. In the middle is the thing that you lean against that works. You might fuck it up and you might make some mistakes, but you got positive feedback in to the idea, and perhaps you collected money early on. So double down on that. Of course, you're not going to get it right. Nothing works in business, really. So
that's true. Yeah. Those early acquisitions, then, telecoms company, were they extremely encouraging? Were there things that went wrong? What was the kind of process like?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, look, the personal numbering was something that I pushed and realized that there just wasn't a path of least resistance there. The path of least resistance was in the phones, so doubled down on the phones. Then when that became kind of a bit of a glass ceiling in terms of the ability to grow it, discovered M&A, and then M&A, I mean, since then I've done hundreds of transactions, taken over 100 companies public. It's been like 20 odd years now of just insane journey and insane learnings. I mean, every day's a school day, and it's an area where the juice is worth the squeeze, because in startups and in traditional entrepreneurship, I think you can create a bit of a prison for yourself where you're working every day, you're immersed in that business. Whereas when you immerse yourself in M&A, the workflow is kind of feast or famine. So, I've had an insanely busy last 2 weeks. I was in Monaco, then London, then I had 2-3 day events here. We had a one-day wealth conference for all of my community and a couple of other communities. I can't remember what it was, 2 days ago, something like that, not long ago. So I've been absolutely non-stop for probably like 10, 14 days. Today, this is the only thing I have. So I got up about 15 minutes before I got here, and I'll do this interview. I'll go back and I'll take the kids to the Christmas, winter wonderland, and go and have a little wander around there. And probably I'll have 1 or 2 Zoom calls before Christmas, and that's it, because we're quite close to Christmas now when we're recording this. And then, I probably won't do anything until January. So maybe travel a bit.
It's sprints of work that are intense in your space to get the deal done, or to deliver the conference, deliver the training. And then it's periods of, like you say, downtime, reflection, recharging. Yeah. And then when something opportunity comes up again, it's time to put the foot back down.
Absolutely, yeah. And in those downtimes, there's nothing to do. I mean, you can be busy, but you won't achieve anything. So it's really kind of feast or famine in terms of the workload. But very rewarding in terms of having that freedom and having that those capital events.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty of buying businesses and some of the strategies that you teach, I want to mention the AIG contract as well, because I think there's a big lesson in there. Because I know that telecoms business, there was interest in purchasing it from you, but you almost resisted that because of having such a large international player
Yeah.
on the books?
Yeah, so I think I had 3 key epiphanies during my kind of M&A early days. The first one is that you don't have to run the marathon. You know, you can grow quickly. You can grow a business quickly through acquisition, or you can acquire a business instead of starting one, and that was a huge epiphany. The second one was when I sold a business, which is I realized you don't make money running businesses, you make money when you sell them, and that was a huge epiphany. And basically, yeah, the capital event and the time freedom that you get back from an exit changes the whole game, because the 2 things entrepreneurs never have is time and money. And when you sell a business, you get back all of your time and you get some money. And so, you know, that can be dangerous. I've seen people, you know, buy fast cars, get divorced, become an alcoholic, you know, go down that path. And then I've seen people, you know, use it as a superpower and really propel themselves into their future kind of life. And so, yeah, the first epiphany was the buying businesses. The second one was selling them, and the third one is the business I didn't sell, which was the call center business. I didn't sell it because it had this 3-year contract with AIG, and it was spitting off cash. We were doing about 200 grand a quarter of net profit. And so, you know, 800 grand a year profit, you could probably sell that business for 2 to 3 million quite comfortably. But in my mind, this was the keeper. You know, it generates lots of cash. It was buying me fast cars. I really liked it. So let's keep this one. And so, anyway, like a year later, it went bankrupt because AIG went bankrupt, and we were, you know, we'd created concentration risk within that business because that contract was so lucrative that we kept putting more and more and more of our capacity into it because it paid better than anything else.
Let's service this over all else.
And it's the world's largest insurance company. What could possibly go wrong? You know, AAA rated, amazing contract to have. So literally, it was a shock to everyone when AIG failed, I think, apart from that guy in the movie.
Yeah, the Big Short, yeah.
Yeah.
He spotted it.
Yeah. But it was a surprise to everybody else. And yeah, when it went bust, that business also followed. And I mean, I actually sold it for £1. It didn't technically go bankrupt, but
it wasn't the 2-3 million that it could have gone
exactly,
for prior.
yeah. And so again, third epiphany is the right time to sell a business is now. I mean, you do not know what is around the corner. There could be a pandemic, there could be a financial crisis, there could be inflation, interest rate rises, there could be a World War III. I mean, there's so many macro risks that are always out there that are completely beyond your control. That, yeah, if you don't get that capital event and get that capital into your account, you can put yourself in serious risk. And the other thing is that a lot of people don't realize is that the amount you could sell your business for, that money invested could probably generate a passive income stream that's greater than the amount of money you can take out of that business on an annual basis, but without the risk of, you know, losing a couple of key staff members or losing a couple of key customers and completely changing the value of that business.
That's such a good point, and it's a little bit of a shake. When I was hearing you speak about this, I was thinking, well, like you say, if you get 2-3 million and you're investing that within the S&P 500 or dare say Bitcoin or some other asset that's maybe less volatile, you can pay yourself a similar value that you were talking about there, and with none of the risk of staff, customers, or changes to that. Yeah. And that's a really, it's lateral thinking for most people who are in grind and growth mode, which is most of the people listening to this are between 20 to 35 and they're in the building phase. They're maybe not thinking, oh, I could sell this for X, Y, or Z. Although I'm sure there's people listening that are like building towards an exit, they don't feel that it's immediately forthcoming.
Yeah, so the answer that everybody gives me when I say the right time to sell is now, they always say, but next year is going to be our best year ever. And they're only right 1 in 10 times, firstly. But secondly, when you sell a business, you can sell it with an earnout. So effectively what an earnout is an asymmetric bet. So when you sell a company, let's say it's worth 3 million today, you can say, but by the way, we're going to win this contract with BP next year, and if we win that, the business is going to go, you know, through the roof. So I want an earnout linked to the performance over the next 3 years, and I'll help you bring those contracts in and get them closed. And that is an asymmetric bet, because you take the money now, and if next year it's successful, you get a piece of it, and if it's not successful, nothing. So it's the heads I win, tails I don't lose outcome. So you can still have the upside from the next 3 years without the risk.
What are some of the ways that somebody could make a business more attractive to a buyer?
Yeah, so most small businesses just aren't in a position where they're fundamentally sellable. Most sophisticated buyers want systems, and one way you can do it is obviously through good technology. Implementing a good system into a business. The other way is just going through an audit process. So most companies or most small businesses in the UK are below the audit threshold of 10 million a year in revenue. But even so, for a few extra thousand a year, you can be audited. And an audit doesn't just check your numbers; it checks the processes that drive the numbers. And so it's a good exercise to go through because it's kind of a practice due diligence, and it also, sees how the business is put together. You then need to have a data room which has all of the relevant information, and if you just Google due diligence checklist, that'll give you a good idea of the type of content that you should find in a data room. And it's a good idea to maintain this in a business anyway, regardless of whether you're trying to sell or not. And then I'd also just test the market. Mention to some people who might be potential buyers, are they acquisitive? What are they looking for? What kind of size and shape of business would appeal to them? And then also decide whether you want to do acquisitions, because there's a truism in M&A, which is that all of the businesses in the world are basically like a pyramid. So you have the big ones at the top and loads of little ones at the bottom, and all the buyers of those businesses is the opposite. There's like one guy at the bottom that can buy those 100,000 businesses, and there's 100,000 people that can buy that one business at the top. And so if you can move up the scale pyramid, you widen the audience of potential buyers for your business. So the growth in valuation is not linear, it's exponential, because as you grow up in size, the audience gets wider. So anyone that understands economics understands there's less for sale and there's more people that can buy them. So you create the supply and demand squeeze, where you suddenly have a lot more buyers than there are sellers, and the price goes through the roof. So could you do acquisitions or could you do mergers to move you up that food chain? And again, we talk about loads of different strategies around that in the Harbour Club quite a bit. And
as you move up that pyramid, you become more attractive with that as well.
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, if you can stick in 30 million of revenue in your company's house filing, you will start getting letters from corporate finance companies saying, "Would you like to sell?" And there's actually some ways that you can do that by partnering up with other companies where you don't actually have to acquire them. But you can build a kind of holding structure that you will report into.
What would you call that strategy?
We call that a minority roll-up. Yeah. And it's quite popular in my community because it's a kind of path of least resistance roll-up. That kind of attracts the attention of some of those search tools and deal search kind of.
Of course, you become
criteria.
front of mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like putting a big billboard outside your house. Yeah.
I know you used to teach 12 ways, but now you teach 15 ways, and it's expanded. What are some of the ways that maybe stand out as first-time buyers or first-time sellers?
Yeah, so I mean, look, most sellers are first-time sellers, and most buyers are first-time buyers. Obviously, we have a few kind of serial acquirers in our community, and one of the most popular strategies is something called WIBO, which is, we call it a work-in buyout. Now, most people are familiar with a management buyout, which is where the management do a deal with the owner to unwind their equity, perhaps over a period of time. A work-in buyout is basically where you do some value add or consulting work for the business, which might be that preparation for sale piece, putting the data room together, making the business look good for a sale. And you normally get paid a consulting fee plus an equity kicker for doing that piece of work. And then once you have that equity kicker, which is typically 20 to 30%, so these are quite chunky equity kickers. Once you have that equity position, you're actually then in pole position to buy the other 70% off them. If you walked into a business cold and said, "I want to buy your business and I want to pay you from the excess cash that the business creates over the next 3 to 5 years," they're probably going to tell you to go away. Like, why would they do that? It's like going into the Ferrari showroom and saying, "I'd like that one, but I'm going to pay you later." It's not a very appealing pitch. But if you solve a problem for them, and you're already a partner, a shareholder in the business, and you have, under that shareholders agreement, you have preemption rights and option rights and things like that. Then to buy the balance of it, you're now, they like you trust you, you've got that rapport, and you're in pole position to get the rest of the deal done. And I've seen these happen in quite short succession, so like within 6 months to get the whole thing bought. Now, if you went down a leverage buyout, for example, which is where you borrow money to buy a business, which we don't recommend because businesses are volatile assets like cryptocurrency. You shouldn't borrow money and buy cryptocurrency. You shouldn't borrow money and buy a small business. It's the same kind of volatile asset. But anyway, leverage buyouts, they will take 9 months to complete because you have your lawyer, the bank's lawyer, the vendor's lawyer. They all write each other love letters and tickle each other's bellies and run up huge fees. And at the end of it, the bank might lend you the money to buy the business. You'll pay the fees regardless, but you might end up with a business. But it will take 9 months, whereas you could probably execute the WIBO first stage and second stage of the acquisition in a shorter time frame, and without risking any capital up front or necessarily having those lawyers' bills as well, because the agreements would be so much more simple and it's between you and the business owner. So you don't have the bank interfering, which always adds lots of additional work and cost.
And with the WIBO, if you're within the business as a consultant or as an employee and you're adding value, I guess you have to have a particular skill set that you, as you said, solves a problem which is going to drive the inherent value of the business. You can't necessarily just be somebody that's in there and spots an opportunity and tries to push it.
Yeah, so look, we've seen people who are experts in marketing go in and leverage, add marketing skills to the business. We've seen people that are like an expert sales training guy who goes in and adds sales as one of the things. We've had people, finance people, all sorts of people that have some experience already, like a coach, consultant, that kind of thing that can bring it. But we also have ordinary entrepreneurs who can go in and add a lot of value. And we have a load of techniques that we talk about in our community, which are around kind of business improvement and financial engineering of the business. And so that can be quite powerful. And then also there's this preparation for sale piece, which again doesn't necessarily require any particular skills. It's more like a kind of school project type based activity. And we have some analytical tools as well. We have a piece of software where you can do an analysis of the company. It'll actually tell you the things that need to be improved. And that serves two purposes. One of them is it gives a roadmap to the person going in and doing the consulting for equity piece. But the other thing is it also creates quite a lot of overwhelm with the business owner. Because you say, these are the things you need to improve to sell the business. They'll read through it and go, shit, I can't do all of that.
It's a huge list.
I've got a business to run. Yeah. and then it's a done for you service at that point.
Yeah, that's right. And that one in particular is a no money down side of things. And I've spoken to many guests from the property side of things who talk about, purchase property or build a portfolio or build an asset class with no money down. Whereas when I think about business, I'm thinking, how on earth can you acquire these businesses with no money down? But that there is just one of the many solutions that is an option.
Yeah, absolutely.
What stands out as another one, Jeremy?
So the one that we do the most is taking companies public and then using the public company. The public company can then issue its own shares or bonds in order to acquire more companies. And like I say, we've taken over 100 companies public in the last 10 years or so, or just less than 10 years, since 2016 was the first one. And learned a ton of lessons, so many mistakes, figured a whole bunch of stuff out. Actually, a lot of the conventional wisdom, a lot of the stuff that the investment banks advise you to do, we've now gone full circle and realized actually there's a much, much better way to do it. But you can even do those transactions no money down. There are lots of unloved public companies that are perhaps listed because they had some technology or some idea and it didn't work out, and they're now just bumping along. And you can bring a business into them, reinvigorate the thing without needing any cash up front. So, there's lots of opportunities in that area too.
Given your experience taking over 100 companies public, what do people need to understand about the benefits of doing so? Yeah,
so I think the biggest mistake is the why. I think people believe that you go public to exit or to raise money because it's kind of just ingrained in us from childhood.
It's probably movies more than anything else that people see that.
Yeah, that like the IPO is somehow the finish line. It's not, it's the start line. And if you pick up Forbes magazine and you look at the richest people in the world, they all took their companies public and used it as a platform to grow, not as an exit. Bernard Arnault with LVMH Group, Warren Buffett with Berkshire Hathaway, Amazon, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, etc. I mean, the list is endless. They took their company public. They didn't take their company public and go, I'm out, and sold all their shares overnight. No, they took their company public and they used that as a platform to grow. It increased their credibility so they could go and win all the best staff, acquire lots of other companies. Facebook, this is going back a number of years when it was called Facebook before it changed its name to Meta. But I remember reading an article about them that they'd done 12 acquisitions in a month, and they used their own stock for acquisitions. And when you read the article, the reason that was surprising, it was the lowest number of acquisitions they'd done in a month since they'd gone public. So, I mean,
and that sounds like a lot to most people.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, we do about one a month, and we're fucking run off our feet. Yeah. So their team must be insanely busy. But they were issuing Facebook stock to do those acquisitions, and they were mainly buying related businesses like advertising agencies and things like that, so they could run the ad revenue through Facebook ads. And so, yeah, they were a voracious acquirer, and that's not the story you hear in the papers most of the time. It's just about how genius a thing.
There's
Facebook
more
is,
users, the app's great, but actually they're hoovering up from a fiscal perspective in the background through more creative strategies.
Exactly, they had a highly valued share that was very liquid that they could issue like a currency to do acquisitions.
What mistakes do companies make before they go public?
So I think one of the ones is surrounding themselves with advisors, and the advisors just milk you. The investment banks, corporate advisors, all of those guys, they're all on retainers. They all stop getting paid when you go public, so they almost have a vested interest in delaying the whole process. And when we took the first company public in 2016, the cost of listing a company on NASDAQ at that point was about $1 million. It's now about $3 million. So just in the 10 years that we've been doing it, the costs have absolutely rocketed. The other thing is there are different exchanges and different markets that are more suitable for different types and sizes of business. And so if you're doing 300 grand a year of profit, you don't want to be listing on NASDAQ. It's way too expensive, and everyone's going to short you and laugh at you and wonder why on earth you're listed there.
Is it maybe an ego thing that they want to be involved at that level?
Possibly, or an advisor. The problem is if you go to a New York advisor, they've got one thing to sell you, which is a NASDAQ listing. So guess what the best thing for you is? A NASDAQ listing. If you go to an advisor in London, they've got one thing to sell you. So guess what? You should be on AIM. And if you go to Frankfurt, they've got one thing to sell you. So they'll tell you have to list in Frankfurt.
A term that I learned in sales training when I was a lot younger was prescription without diagnosis.
Yeah.
They've got this one drug that they're going to prescribe you, and you're getting it whether you've got a cough, the flu, or whether you've got a sore head. It's coming your way.
Exactly that. They've got, So the one thing they have is what they recommend. And so you get this list where you live mentality, which is if you're in the UK, you list in the UK. If you're in Germany, you list in Germany. If you're in Singapore, you list in Singapore. And it might be entirely wrong for you. So look at this as a global economy and be a global citizen and figure out where the best place to list is, because there are very cost-effective places you can list as a small company. Use that as your place to grow, do your acquisitions and become bigger, and then you could go back and cross-list or dual list, or even there's a thing called an ADR, which is where you list a bit of your company on another exchange. And that's when you can go to New York or NASDAQ or one of the bigger exchanges.
One of the terms that you use in relation to going public is democratize wealth. Why do you say that?
Yeah, so one of the challenges with money is that it's all in the wrong places and in the wrong hands. So it's funny how they always talk about, tax the rich, tax the rich, tax the rich. Actually, it's institutions that are the challenge. So the top 500 asset managers in the world control $100 trillion of investment. And those asset managers are things like sovereign wealth funds, university alumni funds, religions. The Church of England has 9 billion under management. So when they're passing that cup around for rebuild the spire, they could probably rebuild the spire using the interest on their interest. It's they're not poor. The Catholic Church, another matter. One of the richer ones is the Church of the Latter-day Saints in America. Incredible fund that they operate. So the problem with these funds is not how they make their money. It's the fact that they will never die. They will never pay taxes. They're immortal, perpetual funds, and they're growing bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So they're swallowing up pretty much the Earth's assets and resources, and they're invested in every asset class known to man. I mean, they're in, stocks, bonds, property, like everything. But they're not investing in small businesses. They actually have a bigger allocation to Bitcoin in that 100 trillion than they do to small business. And yet small business is half of economic output, half of GDP. And if you exclude the government workers, it's over 90% of the private sector workforce. So most people work in a small business, and half of the economic output is from small businesses. And yet we have two economies. We have one over here with all the money in and one over here with all the people in, and they're not joined together. And so when I was growing up, they had this idea called trickle-down economics, which is if you gave people money, it would end up being spent in local communities and create jobs. Now it doesn't. It trickles up and ends up in these institutions, mostly in derivatives and products that never come back into those local communities.
Stuck. Yeah, because trickle-down economics is a very common concept that people understand. And I've spoken to Andrew Craig on the podcast, who's a personal finance author in the UK, really good on this topic. And we want a UK Nvidia. We want a huge global business in the UK. It's $1 billion company because it employs lots of people and it creates wealth through that. Yeah. But not in the way that we would hope, because trickle-down economics would dictate the more of these huge companies we have, the more wealth would come down to the workers and the people within that. But that's not happening in the same way nowadays.
Yeah, so basically, the money gets sucked out of the system and goes into these hot, sandy countries and invests in the derivatives market is now 10 times global GDP. It's $1 quadrillion. It's a 1 with 16 zeros after it. It's a fucking insane number. Germany has more Deutsche Bank has more derivatives on its balance sheet than the entire GDP of Germany. Bank of Scotland has more derivatives on its balance sheet than the whole GDP of the UK. So this is where all the money is going, and it's going there because it's kind of the perfect investment product. So institutions can't invest in small business because they're not liquid, they're really risky, and and they're not scalable. You can't put $100 billion into a small business. Whereas these derivatives are risk managed because they have a quantitative analysis or a quant that tells you what the risk profile is. They're very scalable. You can put $1 trillion in it tomorrow and it won't blink because there's $1 quadrillion of them kicking around, and they're super liquid. You can buy and sell them. You can invest in the morning and divest in the afternoon. And so because of that, the money just doesn't come back into the economy. And so by taking small businesses public, you create a portfolio approach or an index approach for small business. You also create liquidity because they can buy and sell them, and you also create scale, which means you can attract larger amounts of capital. So we believe if you can do that and you can get an allocation of capital into small business, you then democratize wealth, because that really does trickle down, because it goes into the hands of entrepreneurs in every community, town and city in the world. And entrepreneurs are the change agents in society. They're the ones that, if they've been affected by cancer or homelessness or some other thing during their earlier years, they want to solve those problems. And people with entrepreneurial instincts and money really can solve those problems. The champagne socialists in charities have a vested interest in perpetuating problems, and they create dependency around the kind of aid and the support that they provide. So entrepreneurs will fix the world.
That's been one of the biggest cultural problems I've had while I'm still in the UK. The kind of hate and denigration that goes towards people who want to do something new, who want to build, who want to scale. And I wrote down a quote from your book that really stuck with me. In Go Do Deals, you wrote, "What's really funny is a lot of people say entrepreneurs are greedy. They just want money. But actually, I think those who hate just for the money and are people who do jobs purely to pay themselves. Entrepreneurs tend to be those who sacrifice and take risks in order to build a better life and create freedom." And that's exactly what you're saying there. So these people that solve problems.
Yeah, in French, they have an expression, qui s'accuse, j'accuse, which means if you accuse me of something, it's because you're doing it yourself. So if somebody says, "Are you stealing from the till?" it's because they're stealing from the till, you know. And so, yeah, these people, they feel bitter about their existence because they're doing a job they hate in order to pay their mortgage and keep a certain lifestyle. And they're bitter that an entrepreneur took a risk, sacrificed the opportunity of all of those things, and then actually succeeded out the other side of it, because they regret their own life choices, and it eats them up inside. And so, yeah, qui s'accuse, j'accuse.
It becomes a race to the bottom then, though. And I think that's one of the biggest cultural problems within the UK. And I think that's why we have a Labour government. And I think that's why we have a Conservative Party who aren't actually Conservative in any shape or form. They're kind of playing to the gallery. They've kind of completely sacrificed the traditional values that they had.
Yeah, I mean, look, politics is a pendulum, and it swings from the left to the right. And generally speaking, the more extreme in one direction, the more extreme the backlash is the other way. And we've seen that in the US with the election of Trump. And I think, you know, Trump's a nationalist, but at heart he's also a libertarian. And obviously, you know, Milei in Argentina is a libertarian. You've got the other South American one as well in can't remember where it is, but the one that got rid of the MS-13 gang and sorted out all the crime there. And I think Europe's next. I think there'll be a wave over. I mean,
they call it populist.
Yeah,
but I actually don't think it is populist. Like, populist should be what all governments are, because they agree to the will of the people.
Well, I mean, they're screaming words like far right and fascist, but the definition of fascism is you're not allowed to criticize the government. And, you know, we've got people being arrested for tweeting stuff. And, you know, we have fascism right now. In Russia last year, they arrested 400 people for saying things on social media. In the UK, it was 3,000 people, like in a month.
Particularly post Southport as well, which there's a massive cover up to do with that, which we can get into the details maybe another time when I've got a clearer picture on it, but it's pretty controversial.
When there isn't a super injunction from Keir Starmer to stop people talking about it.
That's right. So I completely agree from that perspective. I do think we will, and when I spoke to Daniel Priestley here last year, he talked about this pendulum always swinging back.
Yeah.
And we actually spoke briefly about the trans movement in that regard, where women in men's sports, for example, is kind of the edge of the kind of pendulum.
It's gone too far, and it's going right back the other way.
People have been like, what on earth? That's not okay. Even the most ardent people who want equality and equal rights are like, okay, I'm not comfortable with that. Like men in my child's changing room at school, I'm not really comfortable with that. Yeah. So the pendulum will swing back in that regard. I think politically, I'm very hopeful that we move back in the right direction.
Yeah, no, I think I think it's a natural cycle. I mean, I joked with somebody the other day, you should just sell everything in the UK now, go back in 4 years and buy it back half price, and then wait for the new government to come in, you know. But it might not be half price because the inflation will be fucking rampant, won't it? So it's
That's true. And there's an element of, like I said, I recently released a podcast with James Cooper out here, and I'm somebody that's patriotic. So one of the reasons that I feel I'm still in the UK is, one, my family, my mum and dad, and we live 10 minutes walk from the family house, my brother and I, so we're very close with them. And there's a little bit of I feel a responsibility to try and be a positive force within my friend group, within my kind of audience through the podcast. But there's only so much you can do when the macro factors are so punishing. When you include national insurance, when I've done really well in my sales role in the last 3 years, some of my income is taxed at 60%. How is that sustainable?
60% plus the NI plus the employer's NI. So you're 90. Right. It's 90%. And then when you spend it, there's 20% tax on it. And then when you die, there's 40% tax on it. It's just completely unsustainable. And the thing that people don't get, I mean, Rachel from accounts just did this 40 billion tax raid. The interest on the debt in the UK is 130 billion. So that 40 billion that she's taken from all of these hardworking people is going to BlackRock and to China, because they're the two places that own the most UK bonds. So literally 40 million is coming out of your pocket and it's going to BlackRock and it's going to China. And that is happening because they spend too fucking much. The government's budget is insane. It's over $1 trillion. And $1 trillion. Here in the UAE, they have $75 billion budget, and they have 15 million people. So you have 15 times the spend for 4 times the people. And here, all the roads work. There's no crime. If my wife went to hospital with a scare, and after 2 hours, she'd had a CT scan, a blood test, and the results, and the consultation within 2 hours of walking through the front door without an appointment. You know, it's just so much better, and for so much less. And I mean, you look at things like, you know, I mentioned the Houses of Parliament, 25 billion to refurbish the Houses of Parliament, 30 or 40 billion on an app that was never ever released. It was an app that was never actually used. Yeah, all this PPE equipment, all this stuff. I mean, they literally just throw money away because it's not theirs.
One of the terms that's
500,000 civil servants. What, I mean, an AI could do a better job than most of those civil servants. I think it's just insane.
Yeah, one of the terms that's come up a lot is crony capitalism.
Yeah.
So we've gone and people from a communist perspective will be like, oh, capitalism's now failing, it's time for the rise of the worker, etc., etc. But actually, that's not the case. Capitalism is failing in some aspects because it's become corporatism.
Yeah.
And the big funds like your BlackRocks are just absolutely running the show.
Yeah, and actually, if you look at the Labour budget, they made it very clear that they want you to work for the government or work for a large multinational. That was the absolute message from that budget. Everyone else can go fuck themselves. You work for the government or you work for a large multinational. If Uber wasn't touched, any of those, delivery wasn't touched, any of those large companies have no challenge with that budget whatsoever. It's the 50% of GDP, the 90% of private sector workers, it's those ordinary people in every town and city that got screwed.
Yeah, terrible. Getting back onto more actionable topics for the audience, I really feel that if somebody's perhaps preparing for a sale, one of the terms I think synonymous is due diligence.
Yeah.
What do people get wrong about due diligence that they should get right?
Yeah, not being ready before it starts. So what tends to happen is they'll get the due diligence question list come through, and then they'll start putting everything together. And the longer you take to put it together, the more shit you look. You know that how you do anything is how you do everything. So this idea of you go to the toilet in the restaurant, if it's clean, then it's a good restaurant. It's the same with a business. If you send them a due diligence questionnaire and it takes 3-4 weeks for them to come back with the information, you've got a disorganized, crappy business. So just Google due diligence questionnaire, download it, have it already in a Dropbox or a Google Docs before you go out and talk to people. Most of them are broadly the same, so you're not going to find. You might have the odd thing that you have to go and get, but 90% of them are identical. So you'll be ready.
What about for assessing the other side? So if you're a buyer,
yeah, assessing the other target. So again, Warren Buffett uses this expression that price is his due diligence, which is kind of this idea I talked about in market trading, which is bought right is half sold. So what we try to do is de-risk our entry into the business by not committing capital into the transaction, and therefore reduce the reliance on due diligence, because due diligence will only take you so far, and then there are all sorts of things that you would never discover in a business. I've had businesses where they've been committing bank fraud. We bought the company, they've been committing bank fraud that you would never have found in due diligence. It was very sophisticated, very well covered up, and in that situation you can liquidate the company and take the assets out, but you wouldn't have discovered it in due diligence. So you're better off holding your nose and jumping in, but having protected yourself on the way in, so that when you discover something like that, there's no financial loss to you.
Yeah, my brother works for Marsh & McLellan on the due diligence side for a lot of M&A transactions, so I have a little bit of an insight in terms of like data room. I hear him talk about all the time, and the amount of information that they digest is so significant for the purchases they make.
And also, I mean, since the kind of Sarbanes-Oxley legislation of 2001 or something, was it? I can't remember when it was. But since then, it's got increasingly, just like opening a bank account, it's got increasingly hard and hard and hard. And I mean, I've seen due diligences. So we had a community member sold a business for 11 million. The other side spent 700 grand on due diligence. So almost getting on for 10% of the value of the company in due diligence, and it really is like a job for the boys. There's not much more you can find out, beyond fucking DNA swabbing someone about what's going on in that business. And like I say, in the area that we're in the owner-managed small business area, you're better off reducing risk in other ways than trying to over-DD them, because otherwise you can spend more than the business is worth quite quickly. Of
course. What's one piece of advice you'd want the listener to take away when it comes to buying or selling their first business?
I think, look, you will make some mistakes and you'll figure things out as you go. So kind of get on with it, get started, because you can do lots of these, before you die. So get some experience. You only learn from experience. So get out and get some. And if you have a small business now, a great way to grow it would be through an acquisition. So start thinking about who the other businesses are that you could acquire. Maybe go into LinkedIn and go into Sales Navigator and just filter out who else is in my geographical area, or perhaps a geographical area that you'd like to expand into, and start reaching out to them, start connecting to them, and just for a chat, just for a coffee, see where they're at. No, don't have an agenda. Don't say I'm looking to buy your business. Just look at, I have a similar business to yours. I'm in Glasgow, you're in Edinburgh, let's meet up for a coffee, and just see where those conversations go, because you'd be amazed how after about half a dozen of those meetings, the stars start to line up and you start to see the opportunities there.
You probably find people with similar challenges or similar opportunities, and you I mean, worst case scenario, you learn something from them. Best case scenario, you find a business that's ready-made for you to acquire.
Exactly. Treat it as a research process, and you'll be amazed what you find.
On a personal level, I've heard you speak before about getting married and starting a family at 40 was actually really good for you from a business perspective.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Yeah, so I mean, this is like, it will sound a little bit vulgar in a way, I guess, but I guess when you're young, you invest an awful lot of time chasing women. There's a lot of time and energy and emotional energy that goes into that. I'm glad I left it quite late, because I think guys grow up slower than girls, and so I probably would have been a terrible husband when I was in my 30s. But when I was ready to settle down, it had a magnifying impact on my life after that, because you suddenly take away probably half your waking thoughts are now devoted to your business instead of dating.
There's an admin reduction time.
Exactly, yeah, and also having the kids around means you're out partying less. You're out doing kind of those the kind of toxic activities that occupy quite a lot of time still happen, but in more moderation. It's just a very very healthy and happy existence. And also, I think there is this kind of what are we all here for? Replacing our genetics and leaving something behind.
I think that strikes men
is
later than women. Like, our paternal instinct kicks in later than women, mostly because women's biological clock ticks more so. And I think people can kind of try and blur the lines between how men and women actually have differences, with all the different agendas that we've seen over the past few years. But there are notable differences in terms of when you or I can be potentially having children and the woman that we're married to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, no, I think lots of people have asked me for advice on this, funnily enough, and the advice I often give is pick one. Because what you tend to do in the dating scene is you're just trying to find that small fault in every single person so you can move on to the next one. Oh no, her ears are a bit big, or I don't like her feet, or like she's got funny eyebrows, or something like this, and you keep looking for the flaw that enables you to move on to the next one.
Social media makes that worse as well, I think, because you feel, and although it's definitely not, there's like a very small percentage of men, I would say probably the top 5% of men are being desired by the top 80% of women, probably, because women typically want a man that is better educated, more financially stable than they are, taller than they are, and that's actually becoming less and less common, because women are actually achieving more and more and more in terms of education, and men are actually significantly worse. So I think there is a temptation, if you are a top 5% man, to almost try and have your cake and eat it, and swap things around, whereas you should, and in my opinion, I'm definitely coming to realise this with age, optimise for the really main core qualities that you're looking for, rather than you say nitpick about very bizarre little features.
Yeah. So, find the one that will have your back, be your partner, and just pick one.
You built really successfully though while single. Would you advocate, if you had your time again, to have? You said you would maybe not been a great husband during that time. But would you have had your time again?
I have no regrets with the way round I did it. I'm kind of glad I got it out of the way before the kind of Tinder moment in society, because I think that was a tipping point where I think marriage became increasingly difficult and infidelity went through the roof, because all of a sudden on this smartphone now you could browse, it's that shiny new thing syndrome, it's the grass is always greener, and
browse is the right word, isn't it?
Stuff.
It's like a plethora of options, even though it's an illusion of options, because there must be effort and time invested afterwards to arrange the date, to go on the date, to do whatever you want to do. Whereas I guess when you're swiping, it's like our chimp brains still haven't quite realized that these aren't actually potential partners. These are just potential people that you could meet potentially. Yeah.
And so I'm glad I didn't have all that nonsense, because I think I think that would be very hard. I mean, it'd be very hard to do anything else, wouldn't it?
True. Am I right in saying you turned 50 this year, Jeremy?
Yeah, in June. Yeah. So, I mean, when you said, you were talking about age, I was like, fuck yeah, try turning 50. That's a wake up.
Yeah, definitely. I guess, kind of final question for you. What would need to happen before you turn 60 for you to deem the next 10 years as a success?
Do you know what? haven't given it that much thought. I mean, actually, the thing I do dwell on often is the gratefulness of where I was 10 years ago and where I was 10 years before that. So, what would my 10 year ago self think about me now? And that's more the way I look at it, is the progression of where I've come from to where I am, and the kind of notable step changes over those, between each 5 years and each decade that's there. I'm really passionate about what I do, and I really enjoy what I do, and I would be quite happy if I'm still doing what I'm doing now when I'm 60. There's not a huge amount that I would change.
I need to find
I love
out
doing deals.
I need to find out who this quote's from, but the tools will be heavy, but they'll feel light in your hands. So you're doing a job that many people would be like, oh, it's really hard, really tough. But you're like, oh, I love doing it. I'm a deal junkie, you said before, and you want to chase and chase.
People always say, what's your favorite deal? And I say the next one. I'm really like that. I mean, it's kind of like the second it's done, signed, sealed, delivered, you're suddenly super interested in the other one that's going on. And and it's exciting. It's fun. There's something in. So when I sold watches and jewelry at school, when somebody said yes, I'll buy that one, you got this little endorphin kick, a little kind of buzz. And then when I did, when I sell 1,000 watches to a market trader, you get an endorphin buzz. And then when you sold 100 mobile phones to a corporate client, you got this kick. And then when you bought a company, you got this kick. And then when you sell a company, it's like a big kick. So I think I am a junkie. I think it is. It's that you're just looking for that. It's a sale reward, I guess. And so it's, I'm hooked on my own drugs, basically.
Yeah,
the dopamine or whatever.
Another 10 years of that? That's the plan?
Yeah. I mean, look, I really enjoy it. It's zero complaints about it. I'm very lifestyle driven anyway. Me and my wife travel pretty much every month. If you're interested in the lifestyle, so if you're interested in the business, you follow me on Instagram, which is Jeremy Harbour, and if you're interested in the lifestyle, you follow my wife, Simona Harbour, and you'll just see, we're very blessed, and we have a very nice lifestyle. And so a lot of the decisions we make are lifestyle driven, about where we're going to travel, what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. And so, more of that. Love it.
Yeah, and Dubai facilitates that really well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great hub. You can fly, the direct flights are insane. You can fly almost anywhere directly from here. We had an event in Miami, and so we flew to Miami Emirates direct. And we went to Aruba after that for a couple of days, and then we came back here. We went to Egypt to see the pyramids recently, went to Seychelles, went to Maldives, went to Turkey a couple of weeks as a guest of one of the big brands. Where else? We're constantly going to different places all the time.
And all enabled by M&E.
Yeah, absolutely. And the great thing is you can do it in all of those places as well. In fact, I often say on the Harbour Club, going away somewhere is a great way to get the deal to close. If I try and go to the Cheval Blanc in the Maldives, the second I fucking land, the phone rings with somebody that wants to complete the deal that day. It's Murphy's Law or whatever they call it. If you want the deal to close, book a 40 grand hotel.
Really cool, Jeremy. Well, I've really enjoyed today. I've come away really enthused and excited. I'm sure the listeners have as well. If you want to continue the conversation with you, where should they head towards?
Yeah, social media is a great start. So hit me up on Instagram, Jeremy Harbour, or on X. On Instagram, I'm the one with the blue tick.
Not the one trying to sell.
Not the one trying to flog you crypto. Yeah. So hit Jeremy Harbour with the blue tick and see you there.
Perfect. Both of those will be linked in the show notes. Thank you to you, Jeremy, and thank you to the listener. I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.